The pristine white sheets of the hospital bed were a cruel joke, a stark contrast to the messy, agonizing reality of her life tearing apart. One moment Isabella was pushing through the searing pain of premature labor, her heart screaming for her husband, Alejandro. The next he was there. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, radiating a cold, polished glamour, was the one woman Isabella had prayed was just a figment of her paranoid, pregnant imagination. And as her world crumbled, a single devastating question hung in the air, a question that would be answered by a DNA test, a test that would either validate her deepest love or confirm her darkest betrayal, changing everything forever. Isabella's life was by all external measures a modern-day fairy tale. She lived in a sprawling glass-walled mansion nestled in the most exclusive enclave of the city, a home that boasted panoramic views and an infinity pool that bled into the horizon. Her wardrobe was a curated collection of runway couture, her social calendar a whirlwind of philanthropic galas and exclusive art openings. And at the center of it all was Alejandro Morales, her husband. Alejandro was a titan of industry, a self-made millionaire who had built a tech empire from the ground up. He was devastatingly handsome, with eyes the color of dark honey, and a smile that could disarm world leaders and melt Isabella's heart in equal measure. They had met 5 years ago at a charity auction, a chance encounter that felt like kismet. He had pursued her with a single-minded intensity that left her breathless, showering her with affection, respect, and a love so profound it felt like the safest harbor in the world. Their marriage had been passionate, a true partnership. He valued her opinion on everything from business acquisitions to the thread count of their linens. She in turn was his confidant, his sanctuary from the cutthroat world he navigated. When she told him she was pregnant 9 months ago, he had wept with joy, lifting her into his arms and spinning her around in their sun-drenched living room, promising their child a life of boundless love and opportunity. For the first 6 months of her pregnancy, that promise held true. Alejandro was attentive doting. He'd rush home from the office for her doctor's appointments, massage her swollen feet for hours, and talk to her growing belly, telling his unborn child stories of the adventures they would have. Isabella had never felt more cherished, more certain of her happiness. But then a subtle shift occurred, a change in the atmosphere as imperceptible as a barometric drop before a storm. It started with the late nights. Closing a big deal, mi amor, he'd murmur, his voice weary over the phone. Then came the weekend trips, sudden and non-negotiable. Investor meetings in Singapore, he'd explain, his kiss a fleeting brush against her cheek as he left. The distance wasn't just physical. The easy intimacy they shared began to fray at the edges. He grew guarded with his phone, angling it away from her, when a text message lit up the screen. The shared laughter that once filled their cavernous home became a rare echo. Isabella, hormonal and increasingly anxious, tried to dismiss her fears. This was the pressure of his work, she told herself. He was building a legacy for their child. To doubt him felt like a betrayal in itself. Yet the gnawing unease persisted. She started noticing a new scent on his suits, a faint floral perfume that was decidedly not hers. She saw a credit card statement with a charge for a lavish dinner at a restaurant they had never been to together. When she gently questioned him, he became defensive, his voice taking on a hard edge she'd never heard before. "Are you questioning my loyalty?" Isabella. After everything he'd asked, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and hurt that made her instantly retreat, apologizing for her insecurity. The name Sofia Reyes first entered her consciousness as a whisper on the society pages. A rising starlet, an actress with smouldering eyes and a reputation for being as ambitious as she was beautiful. Alejandro's company had recently signed a major endorsement deal with her. "She's the new face of our brand," he'd explained dismissively when Isabella saw a picture of them together at a press event, his arm firmly around Sophia's waist. They looked for all the world like a couple. Isabella spent the final weeks of her pregnancy in a state of quiet torment, her days a hollow performance of the happy, expectant mother. She decorated the nursery in shades of cream and soft blue. Her hands assembling a crib, she prayed her husband would one day stand beside, with love not duty. She smiled at the baby showers her friends threw, accepting gifts with a gratitude that felt like a lie. Every night she lay in their king-sized bed, the space beside her feeling more like a chasm, and prayed that the birth of their child would be the miracle that would bring her Alejandro back to her. She didn't know that the birth would indeed bring a revelation, but it would be far from the miracle she was hoping for. It would be the beginning of the end. The first pang of pain was sharp and sudden, a fierce clenching deep in her abdomen that stole her breath. Isabella gasped, her hand flying to her belly. It was 2 weeks before her due date. It was too soon. She tried to breathe through it, telling herself it was just another Braxton Hicks contraction, another false alarm. But then another came stronger this time, a relentless wave that brought her to her knees on the cold marble floor of the foyer. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the pain. This was real. This was happening. Her first instinct was to call Alejandro. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. His name at the top of her recent calls. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable. Please leave a message. Alejandro." "It's me," she choked out, her voice a ragged whisper between contractions. "The baby. It's coming. I'm going to the hospital. Please, please meet me there. I need you." She tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. The automated voice was a cold, indifferent sentinel guarding the man who had promised to move mountains for her. Despair warred with the urgency of the moment. With a surge of adrenaline, she called her driver, her voice miraculously steady as she gave him the address. The Clínica Universidad de Navarra in Madrid. The private hospital Alejandro had insisted upon, renowned for its state-of-the-art maternity ward and its discretion for high-profile clients. The drive through the city was a blur of traffic lights and horns, each sound amplifying the frantic rhythm of her heart. The contractions were coming faster now, a merciless tide pulling her under. The hospital staff was waiting, alerted by her call. They whisked her into a private birthing suite, a room that looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility with soft lighting and sweeping city views. But its opulence only made her feel more alone. Nurses with kind, professional faces hooked her up to monitors their soothing words, a distant buzz against the roar of her fear. Where was he? Hours bled into one another. Each contraction was a mountain she had to climb alone. She clutched the cool metal of the bed rail, her knuckles white, her body screaming for relief, her heart screaming for her husband. The nurses offered sympathetic glances. "Have we managed to reach your husband, Mrs. Morales?" one asked gently. Isabella could only shake her head, the shame and fear a toxic cocktail in her throat. And then, just as she felt she was losing her grip, the door to her suite swung open. For a heart-stopping second, Relief flooded her. He was here. Alejandro stood in the doorway, his tailored suit slightly disheveled, his hair looking like he'd run his hands through it 100 times. But the relief curdled into ice-cold shock. He was not alone. Standing just behind him, her hand possessively resting on his arm, was Sofia Reyes. The actress was a vision of cruel perfection. She wore a figure-hugging crimson dress that seemed to mock the sterile white of the hospital. Her makeup was flawless, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in a perfect wave. She surveyed the room with an air of bored amusement. Her eyes, when they finally landed on Isabella in the bed, held a glint of undisguised triumph. It was the look of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. The beeping of the fetal heart monitor seemed to grow louder, a frantic, rhythmic testament to the chaos that had just stormed into the room. Isabella stared at Sofia's hand on her husband's arm, at the unapologetic way Alejandro stood there, bringing his mistress to the birth of his child. The pain of her contractions was nothing compared to the agony that ripped through her heart. The storm had not just arrived. It had made landfall directly in the center of her soul. The air in the birthing suite grew thick, heavy with unspoken betrayals and the sterile scent of antiseptic. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic, steady beep of the monitor, tracking her baby's heartbeat, a stark counterpoint to Isabella's own, which felt as if it had shattered into a million silent pieces. Alejandro. Isabella's voice was a fragile thread of sound, barely audible over the hum of the machines. He finally moved, detaching himself from Sofia's grasp, as if suddenly remembering where he was. He took a hesitant step forward, his handsome face a mask of conflicting emotions, guilt, frustration, and a flicker of something she couldn't name. Isabella. I came as soon as I got your message. You brought her. Isabella's gaze flickered to Sofia, who was now examining her perfectly manicured nails with a deliberate, insulting nonchalance. Isabella, now is not the time Alejandro said, his voice low, urgent. He was trying to manage the situation, to control the narrative, just as he did in his boardrooms. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was the precipice of Isabella's world. Not the time. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat, raw and painful. You bring your mistress Sofia Reyes, the woman whose perfume clings to your clothes, to the birth of our child, and you tell me it's not the time. Another contraction seized her, a vice of pure agony. She cried out, arching her back, the physical pain a welcome distraction from the emotional torment. A nurse rushed to her side, offering her a hand to squeeze. Isabella gripped it, her eyes never leaving Alejandro's. Sofia finally spoke, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. He was with me when you called, at a very important dinner. I simply insisted on coming along to offer my support. She smiled, a small, cruel curve of her lips. We wouldn't want you to be alone at a time like this. The audacity of it was breathtaking. My support. Isabella repeated, her voice shaking with rage. You have been trying to destroy my marriage for months. You are not welcome here. Get out. I'm afraid that's up to Alejandro, isn't it? Sofia's gaze shifted to him, a silent challenge. Tell her, darling. Alejandro looked trapped, a lion caught in a snare of his own making. Sofia, maybe you should wait outside, he said, his voice lacking any real conviction. No, Sofia said firmly, stepping forward. She was claiming her territory. I'm staying. Isabella needs to face reality. Our relationship isn't some sordid little affair. It's real, And frankly, after all the stress you've put him under with your condition, he needs me here." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. Her condition, her pregnancy, the most sacred journey of her life reduced to an inconvenience, a burden. "How dare you?" she whispered, the words filled with a venom she didn't know she possessed. "This is my child. Our child." She looked pointedly at Alejandro, her eyes begging him to say something to defend her, to defend their family. "And we need to be sure of that, don't we?" Sophia added quietly, the words dropping into the tense silence like stones into a still pond. Isabella's head snapped towards her. "What did you just say?" Alejandro finally seemed to find his voice a harsh, defensive tone. "That's enough, Sophia." But the poison had been administered. The seed of doubt, expertly planted by a master manipulator, had found fertile ground in the fractured trust between husband and wife. Isabella stared at Alejandro, searching his face for denial, for outrage at Sophia's insinuation. Instead, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his dark, honey eyes. That flicker was the final fatal blow. He was actually considering it. He was doubting her fidelity. He was doubting their child. A wave of nausea and despair washed over her, so powerful it eclipsed the physical pain. This was a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Her husband, the man she loved more than life itself, stood before her, with his mistress on the verge of questioning the legitimacy of the baby she was currently fighting to bring into the world. The white walls of the luxurious suite began to close in the beeping of the monitor, sounding like a death knell for the life she once knew. In that moment, Isabella understood that she was not just in labor with her child. She was in the process of giving birth to a new horrifying reality. The battle of childbirth was primal and all-consuming. In the hours that followed the confrontation, the world outside of Isabella's body ceased to exist. The sharp words, the betrayal, the chilling presence of Sophia Reyes. It all faded into a distant roar, subsumed by the singular monumental task of bringing her son into the world. Alejandro remained a silent, brooding figure in the corner of the room, while Sophia, to Isabella's fury, had been permitted to wait in the private lounge adjoining the suite. Her presence was a toxic energy that seeped under the door. At 3:17 in the morning, after a final heroic push that tore a scream from Isabella's raw throat, her son was born. He was perfect. A mess of dark hair, a tiny, scrunched-up face, and a cry that was startlingly robust. When the nurse laid him on her chest, warm and slick against her skin, a wave of love so fierce, so absolute, washed over Isabella, cleansing her of everything else. This tiny, helpless being was hers. He was the one pure, untainted thing in her shattered world. She looked at his face, tracing the delicate line of his brow, his miniature nose. She saw Alejandro in him. It was unmistakable in the curve of his lips and the shape of his eyes, which were still sealed shut against the harsh, new light of the world. Tears of exhaustion, relief, and a profound, aching love streamed down her face. She named him Mateo. The door opened, and Alejandro approached the bed, his earlier defensiveness replaced by a look of stunned awe. He stared at the small bundle in Isabella's arms, his expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, Isabella's heart dared to hope. Perhaps, seeing his son, his own flesh and blood, would shatter the spell Sophia had cast over him. He's beautiful, Isabella. Alejandro, whispered his voice thick with emotion. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against Matteo's soft cheek. But the moment was shattered almost as soon as it began. Sophia appeared in the doorway. Her arms crossed her expression, a careful blend of feigned warmth and clinical assessment. "Congratulations," she said, her voice dripping with insincere sweetness. "He is small." She walked closer, her gaze fixed on the baby. "It's remarkable, isn't it? How babies can look like anyone." She let the comment hang in the air before turning her perfectly painted smile on Alejandro. "Darling, now that the hard part is over, perhaps it's time to clear the air, for everyone's peace of mind." Alejandro flinched but didn't contradict her. The poison was still at work. Isabella clutched Matteo closer, a primal protective instinct flaring within her. "There is nothing to clear up," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I think there is," Sophia countered smoothly. "A man like Alejandro needs certainty. He's building an empire, a legacy. The question of succession of lineage. It's not a trivial matter. A simple test would resolve everything. It would be a gift, really, to all of us." Isabella looked at Alejandro, her eyes pleading with him. "Don't do this, Alejandro. Don't do this to us. To him." He wouldn't meet her gaze. He looked from Matteo's innocent face to Sophia's calculating one, his own a canvas of torment. The pressure from Sophia, coupled with his own wounded pride and the seeds of doubt she had so expertly sown, was too much. He was a man accustomed to data, to facts, to mitigating risk, and in his compromised state, that's what this had become, a risk to be managed. "It's just a formality, Isabella," he said, finally his voice devoid of emotion. "To silence any questions. We'll use the best lab. My office uses a place for corporate matters, high-level stuff. Gene Corp Diagnostics. They're discreet and foolproof." The name meant nothing to Isabella, but the words foolproof and formality felt like daggers. He had already made the decision. He had chosen doubt over faith, accusation over love. A nurse, looking deeply uncomfortable, entered with the necessary kit. A simple buccal swab from the inside of Matteo's cheek and one from Alejandro. The procedure was quick, sterile, and clinical. As the nurse gently swabbed her newborn son's mouth, Isabella felt a profound and bitter coldness seep into her bones. Her son's welcome into the world was not a celebration of love, but an evidence-gathering accusation. His very identity was being questioned before he had even been alive for an hour, all because his father had brought a viper into their lives. The results, Alejandro informed her, would be expedited. They would have the truth in 24 hours. For Isabella, it felt like a death sentence. The next 24 hours were the longest of Isabella's life. She refused to let Matteo leave her sight, holding him, feeding him, memorizing every detail of his perfect face, as if she were branding the image of him onto her soul. Alejandro had retreated, booking a separate room in the hospital at Sophia's insistence. He sent flowers, a massive, ostentatious bouquet of white lilies that filled the room with a funereal scent. Isabella had the nurses remove them immediately. She existed in a state of suspended animation, a bubble of maternal love, surrounded by a sea of dread. Every time the door opened, her heart leaped into her throat. Nurses came and went, checking on her, and the baby, their professional smiles doing little to soothe her frayed nerves. They all knew. The hospital staff whispered in the hallways. The story of the millionaire, his laboring wife, and the famous actress was the kind of drama that spread like wildfire. Isabella felt their pity, their judgment, and it was suffocating. Late the next afternoon, Alejandro appeared at her door. Alone this time. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled. In his hand he held a sleek tablet. "The results are in," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. He didn't approach the bed, but stood near the door, as if creating a safe distance between them. Isabella's breath hitched. She tightened her hold on Mateo, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Alejandro, Gene Corp just sent the encrypted report to my secure server," he said, his fingers tapping on the screen. He brought up a document, a clinical-looking page filled with genetic markers and technical jargon, but at the bottom, highlighted in a stark red box, was the conclusion. He turned the tablet towards her. She didn't need to read the complex data. The 2 words at the bottom were all that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. The world tilted on its axis, the beeping of the monitors, the distant city sounds, her own breathing. It all faded into a deafening silence. 0%. The number was an absurdity, a statistical impossibility, a lie so profound it defied comprehension. "No," she whispered. It was the only word she could form. "No, that's not possible. It's a mistake." Alejandro let out a harsh, broken sound that was almost a laugh. "A mistake Isabella Gene Corp Diagnostics has a perfect record. They are the best in the world. The science doesn't lie." He looked at her then, and the conflict that had been warring in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by a chilling certainty, a look of utter betrayal and revulsion. All this time, he said, his voice thick with a pain so deep it was terrifying. Our entire marriage. Was it all a lie? Who was he, Isabella? Who was the man you were sleeping with behind my back? There was no one, she cried, her voice cracking. Alejandro. You are his father. I have never been with anyone but you. Look at him. He looks just like you. I don't see it. He shot back his face, a cold, hard mask. I see a stranger. I see your betrayal. Suddenly the door swung open, and Sophia swept in, a dark angel arriving for the final act. She went straight to Alejandro's side, placing a comforting hand on his back. I'm so sorry, darling, she murmured, though her eyes when they met Isabella's were alight with malicious triumph. I knew something was wrong. I could feel your pain. She was the architect of this destruction, and now she was playing the part of the savior. There's been a mistake, Isabella, repeated her voice, rising with hysteria. The lab, someone made a mistake. Or you did this, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Sophia. This is your doing. Sophia feigned a wounded look. Isabella, I know you're emotional, but this paranoia is not helping. You've been caught in a lie, and you're lashing out. It's understandable. She turned to Alejandro. She's not well, my love. We need to get you away from this toxicity. Alejandro looked at Isabella, at the woman he had once loved, now hysterical in a hospital bed, clutching a child he believed wasn't his. And he made his choice. My lawyers will be in contact with you, he said, his voice as cold and final as a tombstone. They will arrange for a settlement on the condition that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear. You will not use my name. The child is not my responsibility. You are on your own. He turned and walked away. Sophia clinging to his arm, whispering soothingly to him. He didn't look back. The door clicked shut, plunging the room into a deafening silence. Isabella stared at the closed door, her mind struggling to process the cataclysmic event that had just occurred. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her name, her future. They had taken it all. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. He was all she had left. A new feeling began to smolder beneath the shock and grief. It was a slow burning ember of rage. They had called her a liar. They had called her son a stranger. They had built a lie on top of a betrayal and used it to destroy her. "No," she whispered, not to the empty room, but to her son. "I will not disappear. I will fight. I will prove who you are, Matteo. I swear it." The first deception had been fired. The war had just begun. The eviction was swift and brutal. Less than 48 hours after giving birth, while she was still physically and emotionally shattered, a stern-faced man in a tailored suit, one of Alejandro's lawyers, arrived at the hospital. He presented her with a set of papers and a bank card. "Mr. Morales has made an initial deposit of 50,000 euros into this account." The lawyer stated, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "It is a gesture of goodwill. In exchange, you will vacate the premises of the Madrid estate by the end of the day. A car will be waiting to take you and the child wherever you wish to go within the city limits." He slid another document across the table. A non-disclosure agreement. "Sign this and a more substantial final settlement will be discussed. Refuse and the goodwill deposit is all you will ever receive." Isabella looked at the man at the cold legal document that sought to erase her from Alejandro's life to buy her silence and her son's illegitimacy. The ember of rage within her glowed brighter. She pushed the papers back across the table. "Tell Alejandro Morales I will not be silenced," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The lawyer simply raised an eyebrow, collected his papers and left. The message was clear. She had chosen the hard way. Thrown out of the hospital with a newborn and a small bag of borrowed baby supplies. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. The gilded cage had vanished, and she was in a free fall. She had no family in Madrid. Her parents lived in a small town in a different country, and had a fragile relationship with Alejandro at best. Her so-called friends were Alejandro's friends, society swans who would flock to power and money, and would undoubtedly believe the salacious narrative Sofia and Alejandro were already spinning. There was only one person she could turn to: Anna. Anna was her childhood friend, a fiery, no-nonsense journalist who had always viewed Isabella's millionaire lifestyle with a healthy dose of skepticism. She lived in a small, cluttered but cozy apartment in the vibrant Malasaña district, a world away from the sterile opulence Isabella had known. When Isabella called, her voice breaking, Anna didn't hesitate. "Give me the address. I'm coming to get you." Seeing Anna's familiar, warm face was the first moment Isabella felt she could truly breathe. Anna took one look at her pale, shell-shocked friend and the tiny infant in her arms, and her expression hardened with protective fury. "That son of a bitch," Anna muttered carefully, taking Matteo from Isabella's arms so she could get in the car. "I never trusted him. Too polished. Too perfect." Anna's apartment was a sanctuary. It smelled of coffee, old books, and life. While Isabella showered, Anna made a makeshift nursery in her spare room. She listened patiently as Isabella recounted the entire horrific ordeal, the months of suspicion, the confrontation in the hospital, Sofia's cruel words, and the devastating DNA test. 0%, Anna said, her journalist's mind immediately kicking into gear. That's not just a negative result, that's a statistical anomaly. It's almost more likely to get a false positive than a result that absolute. Unless it's true, Isabella whispered, the fear still a raw wound. No, Anna said firmly, her eyes blazing with conviction. Unless it was rigged. You said he used a place called Gene Corp Diagnostics. Isabella nodded. I've heard of them, Anna said, pulling out her laptop. They're top tier. They handle sensitive corporate espionage cases, high-stakes patent disputes. Their security is supposed to be legendary, which also means their reputation is everything. A proven mistake would ruin them. For days, Isabella focused solely on Matteo, finding a fragile peace in the simple, demanding rhythm of caring for a newborn. But Anna was a dog with a bone. She spent her nights digging using her journalistic resources and back channels to probe into Gene Corp. It's a fortress, Anna reported back a week later, frustrated. Their digital security is airtight. No disgruntled employees speaking out, no whispers of malpractice. They're clean. Isabella's heart sank. So it's a dead end. Not necessarily, Anna said, her eyes gleaming. If you can't break down the front door, you look for a side window. You said Alejandro's lawyer mentioned they use Gene Corp for corporate matters, right? High-level stuff. Isabella nodded. So who in Alejandro's corporate world would have the motive and the means to orchestrate something this complex? This isn't just about a jealous mistress wanting to get rid of a wife. Tampering with a Gene Corp result would be incredibly risky and expensive. Sophia might have the motive, but does she have that kind of power? This feels bigger. This feels like a corporate hit aimed directly at Alejandro's heart. Anna's words hung in the air. The idea was terrifying, but it also made a twisted kind of sense. The attack felt too precise, too devastating to be merely a crime of passion. They had targeted his legacy, his heir. We need proof, Anna. Without it, it's just a crazy conspiracy theory from a bitter, discarded wife. Then we get proof, Anna declared, her jaw set. We can't challenge Gene Corp head-on. But we can investigate the chain of custody. The sample was taken at the hospital. It was picked up by a courier. It was delivered to the lab. Every step is a link in the chain, and every chain has a weak link. We just need to find it. It was a sliver of hope, but for Isabella, it was everything. She was no longer just a victim. She was a fighter. Cast out and left with nothing, she and Anna would start their own investigation, a quiet war waged from a small apartment in Malasaña against a powerful, unseen enemy. They were looking for the truth, one broken link at a time. The first few weeks of the investigation were a series of frustrating dead ends. Anna's official inquiries into the hospital's protocol were met with polite but firm stonewalling, citing patient confidentiality. Alejandro's confidentiality. They refused to release the name of the courier service or the specific technician who handled the samples. It was a wall of institutional silence designed to protect wealthy clients. They're circling the wagons, Anna said, pacing her small living room, a mess of papers spread across her coffee table. Alejandro's legal team has probably already been in contact, reminding them of the consequences of a privacy breach. Isabella, rocking a fussy Matteo, felt a familiar wave of despair. So we're stuck. No, Anna insisted, her eyes alight with a new idea. We're thinking like journalists trying to get people to talk. We need to think like a spy. The weak link isn't the official channels, it's the people. Anna's new strategy was to focus on the human element. She spent days camped out in the cafe across from the Clínica Universidad de Navarra, observing the flow of medical couriers. She cross-referenced the logos on their uniforms with local company databases. After 3 days of surveillance and 10 cups of coffee, she got a hit, a mid-level company called Biotrans Express. They weren't the biggest or most prestigious, but they handled overflow work for several major hospitals. The next step was to find the driver. Anna, using a plausible cover story about a lost but sentimentally valuable and non-biological package, managed to get a list of drivers who had been on duty the night Mateo was born. One name stood out: Javier. A part-time driver, a university student trying to make extra cash. He was the definition of a weak link. Finding Javier was easy enough. Getting him to talk was harder. Anna and Isabella, with Mateo sleeping in his carrier, cornered him one afternoon on his university campus. He was jumpy, defensive, and denied everything. I just deliver the packages, he insisted, refusing to make eye contact. I don't know what's in them. I pick up. I drop off. That's it. But Anna was relentless. We know there was a special pickup that night. A priority run from the Clinica to Gene Corp Diagnostics. A VIP client. A pickup that was logged under unusual circumstances. She was bluffing, but it was a calculated risk. Javier's composure cracked. He paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Isabella spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but heavy with the weight of her pain. She adjusted the carrier so Javier could see Mateo's sleeping face. That package contained the future of this little boy. It was a lie. And we think you know something about it. The sight of the baby, the raw emotion in Isabella's voice, seemed to break through Javier's fear. He glanced around nervously, then motioned for them to follow him to a more secluded bench. Look, I needed the money, he confessed, his voice dropping to a whisper. My tuition was due. I got a call that night, not from my dispatcher, but from a private number. It was a man. He told me to intercept the VIP pickup from the Clinica. He said the original sample was contaminated, and that he had the replacement sample. He told me to make sure the replacement was the one that got delivered to Gene Corp. Isabella's heart hammered in her chest. A replacement sample. Did you see the man? Javier shook his head. No. He directed me to a side street near the hospital. The package was left for me in a lockbox. It looked official, same packaging, same seals. But the original sample, I was supposed to destroy it. He paid me 5,000 euros just to switch the packages and keep my mouth shut. It was the smoking gun, a confession, a clear act of sabotage. Did he give you a name? Anything? Anna pressed. No name, Javier said. But his voice, it was distinctive, low, gravelly, and he mentioned a name. He said, Rivas will be pleased the matter is handled. The name hung in the air. Rivas. It meant nothing to Isabella. But when she relayed the information to Anna later that night, Anna's eyes went wide. She turned to her laptop and began typing furiously. Ricardo Rivas. Anna breathed, pulling up a series of articles. He's Alejandro's biggest rival. They've been locked in a brutal corporate war for the last 2 years over a new cellular technology patent. Rivas has a reputation for playing dirty. Very dirty. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture far more sinister than Isabella could have imagined. This wasn't just about Sophia Reyes. She was likely a pawn, a beautiful, willing distraction. The real mastermind was Ricardo Rivas. He hadn't just wanted to wound Alejandro in the boardroom. He had orchestrated a strike against him that was deeply, horrifically personal. He had aimed to invalidate Alejandro's legacy, to poison the root of his dynasty, by making him deny his own son. But what about Sophia? Isabella asked. She was there. She was the one who pushed for the test. And who do you think put the idea in her head? Ana countered. Rivas is smart. He wouldn't get his own hands dirty. He would find someone close to Alejandro, someone with their own motives, and use them. Sophia wanted you gone. Rivas wanted Alejandro broken. They had a common enemy. Suddenly, Ana stopped. She was staring at a photo from a society gala taken 6 months prior. In the background, almost lost in the crowd, stood Sophia Reyes. She was in an animated conversation with a silver-haired, imposing man. Ana zoomed in. The man was Ricardo Rivas. It was all the proof they needed to take the next step. They had the driver's confession. They had the motive. They had the connection between the conspirators. They now had the ammunition to go back to Alejandro, not as a spurned wife with a wild theory, but with cold, hard facts. They had a glimmer of hope, and it was blindingly bright. Armed with Javier's confession and the damning connection between Sophia and Ricardo Rivas, Isabella knew she couldn't just walk up to Alejandro. He was walled off, cocooned in his anger, and manipulated by the very people who had orchestrated his pain. She needed a battering ram, and that meant finding a lawyer who was fearless enough to take on a titan like Alejandro Morales. Ana, through her network, found the perfect person. A sharp, formidable attorney named Elena Vargas, a woman known for taking on impossible cases and winning. Elena listened to Isabella's story in her sleek, minimalist office, her expression unreadable. She examined Anna's research, Javier's secretly recorded confession, and the photograph of Sophia with Rivas. When Isabella was finished, Elena leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. "This is beautiful," Elena said the words, sending a shiver down Isabella's spine. "It's a symphony of corporate espionage and personal betrayal. They didn't just break the law. They were arrogant about it." Elena's strategy was aggressive. She didn't file a quiet motion. She fired a cannonball. She filed an emergency petition with the family court alleging fraud, conspiracy, and emotional distress. Crucially, she demanded an immediate court-ordered and supervised second DNA test. She attached Javier's affidavit and the evidence linking Sophia to Rivas. She served the papers not just to Alejandro's legal team, but to Alejandro himself. The effect was explosive. Alejandro, who had been trying to bury his pain in work and the empty companionship of Sophia, was blindsided. His lawyers had assured him Isabella would fade away. Instead, she had returned with an army. His first reaction was rage. He called Elena roaring about defamation and harassment. "Mr. Morales." Elena's voice was like ice over the phone. "Your anger is noted. However, we have a sworn affidavit from the courier who switched the samples on the night your son was born. He did so on the instruction of a man who stated that Rivas will be pleased. We also have evidence placing your current companion, Miss Sophia Reyes, in private conversation with your chief business rival, Ricardo Rivas. If you wish to contest this in open court, and have this drama play out on the front page of every newspaper, be my guest. Or you can consent to a simple supervised blood test. The choice is yours. Faced with the undeniable evidence and the threat of a public spectacle that would destroy his company's reputation, Alejandro was cornered. He agreed to the test. The second test was a world away from the first. It took place in a neutral medical facility overseen by a court-appointed supervisor. Elena Vargas was there, a stoic guardian. Alejandro was there, his face pale and grim. Isabella was there, holding Mateo, her heart, a tangled mess of hope and fear. Sofia was notably absent, having been ordered by Alejandro's frantic lawyers to make herself scarce. The blood draw was quick. The wait for the results was agonizing. They all gathered 2 days later in Elena Vargas's conference room. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife. A court official arrived with a sealed envelope. He opened it and read the single-page report aloud. His voice was flat and official. Based on the analysis of the DNA samples provided, the alleged father, Alejandro Morales, is not excluded as the biological father of the child, Mateo Morales. The probability of paternity is 99.9999%. Silence. The words echoed in the sterile room. 99.9999%. Isabella let out a shuddering sob, burying her face in Mateo's soft blanket. Vindicated. Her son was vindicated. Alejandro stared at the report as if it were written in a foreign language. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, mottled gray. The entire foundation of his rage, his cruelty, his life for the past month had been a lie. A lie he had not only believed, but had championed. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her for the first time since that horrific night in the hospital. He saw the profound pain in her eyes, the exhaustion, the resilience. And he saw the love she held for the son he had disowned. The weight of his actions crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest as if he couldn't breathe. Isabella. He choked out his voice, a raw, broken thing. My God, what have I done? The unmasking was complete. But the truth was a double-edged sword. It had cleared Isabella's name, but it had also unleashed a new kind of chaos. The betrayal was not hers, but his, and the man who had been the architect of it all, Ricardo Rivas, was still out there, while the woman who had acted as his willing accomplice, Sofia Reyes, was about to face a reckoning of her own. Alejandro had his son back, but he had lost his wife, and the journey to even begin to atone for that was a mountain far higher than any he had ever climbed in the world of business. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Armed with the court-verified DNA results and Javier's testimony, Elena Vargas didn't just win. She went on the offensive. She strategically leaked key parts of the story to Ana, who crafted a stunning, explosive piece of investigative journalism that laid the entire conspiracy bare. The story of the corporate titan, the spurned wife, the scheming actress, and the rival who weaponized a baby's paternity became an international sensation. Ricardo Rivas's reputation was shattered. His company's stock plummeted as investors fled from the taint of his dishonorable tactics. He was engulfed in a firestorm of lawsuits and investigations. Sofia Reyes's career evaporated overnight. The endorsement deals vanished. The film roles were rescinded. Branded as a malicious homewrecker and a co-conspirator in a cruel plot against a mother and her newborn, she became a pariah. The public that had once adored her now reviled her. She disappeared from the limelight, her ambition turning to ash in her mouth. But for Isabella, the public victory was a hollow echo compared to the private war still raging in her heart. Alejandro was a man undone. The revelation had not just exposed his gullibility, it had forced him to look at a part of himself he never knew existed, a cruel, vengeful, and weak man, easily manipulated by pride and a beautiful face. He was consumed by a guilt so profound it was a physical illness. He fired his entire legal team. He came to Anna's apartment, not as a millionaire, but as a penitent. He stood at the door, drenched from the rain, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Isabella," he said, his voice raw. "There are no words to excuse what I did. I was a fool, a monster. I let them poison my mind against you, the purest thing in my life. I betrayed you. I betrayed our son." He had transferred the Madrid mansion into her name. He had set up a trust fund for Mateo so vast that it would ensure his future 100 times over. He offered to finance Anna's dream of starting her own independent news agency. He offered Isabella anything she wanted the world if she would just take it. But Isabella was no longer the woman who had lived in the gilded cage. The fire of the past month had burned away her naivete, reforging her into someone stronger, someone who understood that her worth was not tied to a man, a mansion, or a name. She let him see Mateo. She watched as he held his son for the first time with the full, undisputed knowledge that this was his flesh and blood. She saw the tears stream down his face, the profound, gut-wrenching regret in his eyes. A part of her, the part that still loved the man he once was, ached for him. But love was no longer enough. Trust once shattered so completely could not simply be glued back together. Weeks turned into months. Alejandro was relentless in his pursuit of redemption. He attended therapy. He made public apologies. He dedicated his time and resources to charities for single mothers. He sent her letters not of excuse, but of self-reflection, taking full accountability for his every failure. He didn't ask her to come back. He simply asked for the chance to prove he could be the father Mateo deserved, and perhaps one day, a man she could respect again. The story ends not with a kiss, but with a choice. We see Isabella months later, sitting in the sun-drenched garden of the Madrid mansion. Her mansion. She is radiant, confident, a queen on her own throne. Mateo is laughing in his playpen on the grass. Her phone buzzes. It's a message from Alejandro. He is in the city and would like to see Mateo. He makes no demands on her time, simply offering to be a father. Isabella looks at her son, at the beautiful life she has secured for them both. She has been vindicated. She has found her power. The story is no longer about his betrayal, but about her resilience. Whether she will ever let Alejandro back into her heart remains an unanswered question. But for the first time, the choice is entirely hers. She is not a victim of a millionaire's drama, but the architect of her own new life, built from the ashes stronger and more beautiful than before. The journey of Isabella is a testament to the incredible strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. From the depths of unimaginable betrayal to the triumphant reclaiming of her truth, her story reminds us that even when our worlds are set on fire, we can rise from the ashes. But what do you think? Was Alejandro's remorse genuine? Can a trust so completely shattered ever be rebuilt? Or are some betrayals truly unforgivable? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever wondered how a single moment, one split second of discovery, could shatter a perfectly crafted facade. This is the story of Sarah Robertson, a devoted wife who believed in the sanctity of love and marriage, only to find herself caught in a whirlwind of betrayal when she stumbled upon her husband's mistress at his office. As she stood there, pregnant and trembling with rage, little did she know that a DNA test lurked in the shadows, poised to devastate everything she thought she knew. Brace yourself for a relentless ride of lies, secrets, and shocking twists that will leave you speechless. Sarah Robertson was no stranger to life's challenges. At 32, she had faced her fair share of heartbreak and setbacks before meeting Richard Johnson, a charismatic investment banker at Allen & Myers Financial Services. When Richard first walked into her life, he seemed to radiate stability, confidence, and a touch of old-fashioned charm. That was 5 years ago. Today, Sarah was sitting by the large bay window in their suburban home, hands resting gently on her growing belly, reflecting on the blessing she was about to bring into the world. The house itself was a symbol of their mutual hard work, a 2-story brick home with a pristine lawn and carefully chosen decor. Friends would comment on how picture-perfect their life seemed. Neighbors smiled at the sight of Sarah's baby bump waving in approval as they jogged or walked their dogs down the quiet streets. On the surface, everything looked idyllic: a glowing wife preparing a nursery, a busy husband providing for his family, and a child on the way. Yet beneath the veneer of a perfect suburban marriage lurked a subtle disquiet. It had started as the faintest flicker of doubt, those nights Richard would come home late, without a proper explanation, or the weekends he claimed to be catching up on office work, while Sarah battled morning sickness alone. Sarah tried convincing herself it was all temporary. After all, Richard's job was demanding, and they needed to prepare financially for the baby's arrival. Their relationship had blossomed quickly. After a whirlwind romance of less than a year, they got married in an intimate ceremony on a sunny beach in Hawaii. Family and close friends witnessed their vows, tears of joy shining in their eyes. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, was the best man, a tall, boisterous fellow who loved practical jokes but had a heart of gold. Sarah's longtime confidant, Harriet Edwards, served as her maid of honor and had been the first to encourage Sarah to take a leap of faith with Richard. Shortly after the honeymoon, Sarah and Richard settled into the rhythms of daily life. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, worked from a cozy office upstairs. Her flexible schedule allowed her to build a stable clientele while also keeping the house in order. Richard, on the other hand, thrived in the high-stakes world of finance. He could negotiate million-dollar contracts before breakfast and charm his boss into awarding him the heftiest bonuses by lunchtime. However, once Sarah became pregnant, life started shifting. What had once been a comfortable partnership turned into anxious nights and suspicious glances. Sarah found herself scrolling through Richard's social media, looking for signs of hidden messages or flirty interactions. She had yet to find concrete evidence, just a vague sense that something was off. If only she could put her finger on it, Sarah thought as she sat by the window that day. In her heart, she still hoped everything was fine, that the weight of her suspicions was merely the pressure of impending motherhood. But an unshakable feeling told her a storm was brewing, and no carefully curated suburban dream could shelter her from the downpour that was about to come. The first real hint arrived one Friday evening. Sarah was up late designing a client's logo when she heard Richard's car pull into the driveway. It was nearly midnight. Her heart fluttered with relief, but as he stepped through the front door, Her relief shifted to alarm. He reeked of expensive perfume, not the kind she wore, and not the kind carried by the air of any bar she knew he frequented after work. "Hey, honey," Richard said with an attempt at casualness, removing his tie and avoiding her eyes. A faint flush crept over his cheeks. In the past, she might have blamed the cold, but it was a balmy night with barely a breeze. Sarah forced a smile. "Late night." "Yeah. We had a few urgent client meetings, then some colleagues wanted to grab drinks," he replied. He kept his explanation succinct, offering no more details than necessary. It felt rehearsed. Curiosity flamed within her. She wanted to press for more details, names of colleagues, location of the bar, but she bit her tongue, not wanting to spark an argument. Pregnancy hormones had been causing tension lately, but deep down she suspected this apprehension was something else entirely. Sarah had enough experience with heartbreak to recognize the signs of evasion. Instead, she reached for a different approach. "You hungry? I kept dinner warm." Richard shook his head. "I'm beat. I'll just shower and head to bed." As he trudged upstairs, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, trying to steady her breath. The faint floral scent of someone else's perfume lingered like a ghost in the foyer. Suspicion took root, its tendrils wrapping around her heart. That night, she lay awake, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The next morning, Sarah decided to confide in Harriet. Over a cup of herbal tea at the local cafe, Harriet listened intently, her brow furrowed. They sat tucked in a corner away from the chatter of other patrons. Harriet was the kind of friend who would never sugarcoat the truth. She had been Sarah's companion through heartbreaks past, including Sarah's broken engagement nearly a decade ago. "Sarah, you have to trust your gut," Harriet said, her voice low yet firm. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. But I don't want to accuse him of anything without proof." Sarah replied anxiously, twisting her wedding ring. "He's under a lot of stress at work, and I know the baby is adding to his worries." Harriet sighed. "I get it. You don't want to start a fight or push him away. But you can't ignore the signs. Keep your eyes open." Over the following days, Sarah did just that. She paid attention to Richard's mood swings, the times he spent on his phone, the frequency of his late meetings. She noticed how he sometimes disappeared into the garage for phone calls. She began to wonder if he was truly just talking to clients. Each suspicious moment piled onto the next, forming a mountain of doubt. Yet Sarah struggled to confront him directly. Part of her was afraid of what she might discover. Another part of her worried about the baby needing Richard's support and their finances in order. But little did she know that her suspicions were about to be validated in a far more dramatic way than she could have ever anticipated. It was a bleak Wednesday afternoon when everything came crashing down. Sarah had spent the morning at her obstetrician's office for a routine checkup. The doctor, Dr. Amelia Green, had assured her the pregnancy was progressing normally, and Sarah felt a wave of relief. She thought about surprising Richard at his office with lunch and news of the baby's healthy progress. After all, maybe Harriet was right. Maybe they just needed a little reconnection, something spontaneous to remind them of the love that existed before suspicion took hold. Clutching a paper bag with Richard's favorite tuna salad sandwich, Sarah drove into the city and arrived at Allen & Myers. She walked through the gleaming lobby, giving the receptionist a polite smile. The smell of polished floors and expensive cologne filled the air. Sarah made her way to Richard's floor, a sense of anticipation coursing through her. She pictured the delight on his face when she handed him the lunch, imagining he'd embrace her, declare how thoughtful she was, and maybe they'd talk about baby names. But as the elevator doors opened, Sarah's heart plunged into her stomach. Standing by Richard's office door was a stunning brunette in a tight pencil skirt and a silky blouse, giggling as Richard gently brushed a strand of her hair off her face. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't immediately notice Sarah's arrival. Sarah froze the blood draining from her face, her fingers gripping the paper bag like a lifeline. When Richard finally spotted her, he stiffened. The brunette's face twitched with surprise, and a subtle panic flickered in her eyes. "Sarah." Richard stammered, taking a step back as if the floor had turned to lava. "What are you doing here?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was paralyzed by the unspoken truth hovering in the room. At last she found her voice. "I wanted to surprise you with lunch, but I see you're already occupied." The woman's nameplate on her desk read, Christine Monroe, and Sarah recalled Harriet mentioning a new hire in Richard's department. Suddenly the perfume Sarah smelled on him made sense. Her cheeks burned at the realization that it was this woman's perfume she'd detected on Richard's suit. Christine offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. "I'm sorry. We were just discussing a client pitch." Richard nodded vigorously, attempting to play along. "Yes, just work stuff." Sarah's eyes flicked between the two. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "Right," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. Her gaze dropped to the lunch bag in her hand, which now felt like the cruelest joke. She turned on her heel and left, ignoring Richard's calls for her to wait. In that single moment, all the illusions, excuses, and rationalizations she had clung to were obliterated. The floor around her felt as if it might collapse at any second. She hurried back to the elevator, tears blurring her vision. The ride down to the lobby felt agonizingly slow, her mind reeling with questions. Was this a one-time flirtation or a full-blown affair? How long had it been going on? And most crucially, how was she supposed to protect her unborn child from the fallout of this betrayal? Sarah managed to make it home before the tears truly took over. She shut the front door behind her, slid to the floor, and sobbed as muffled screams of anguish escaped her lips. The baby in her womb stirred as if sensing her heart break, prompting her to cradle her belly gently. She realized that no matter how betrayed she felt, her first priority was to remain calm for her unborn child. Still trembling with fury and sorrow, Sarah forced herself into her office, turning on the computer to distract her mind. Within minutes, she found herself searching Christine Monroe's name on social media. There she was. Glamorous photos, multiple posts about late nights at the office, each one racking up likes and flirtatious comments. Sarah's stomach churned at the pictures Christine posing in chic outfits, always sporting that same indulgent smile. Nothing explicit pointed to Richard, but a few cryptic captions about office romance made Sarah's blood boil. That evening around 7:00 p.m., Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Sarah listened to his footsteps as he approached the front door. He entered the house, slowly setting his briefcase down, with a cautious thud, as though he expected to find the place torn apart. Gathering her courage, Sarah stepped into the hallway. The tension between them was palpable. "Sarah," he began, voice tinged with worry. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms protectively over her chest. "Yes, we do." They moved into the living room. Richard tried to take her hand, but she pulled away, refusing to let his touch dilute her anger. He sighed heavily. "Nothing's going on with Christine," he insisted. "She's a junior associate on my team. I've been showing her the ropes." That's it. Sarah's eyes narrowed. Really? Then explain the perfume. On your clothes the late nights, the looks you two shared in your office. Does that all mean nothing? He opened his mouth to retort but fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. That hesitation spoke louder than any confession. Sarah swallowed hard, tears threatening to surface again. "Look," Richard muttered finally. "I admit things got complicated. We spent a lot of time together on projects, had some drinks, maybe it crossed a line. But I swear it isn't serious." Sarah shook her head, the anger boiling. "It isn't serious to you because you have a wife and a child on the way. You can pick up and drop these little flings whenever it suits you. But do you have any idea what this does to me? To our family?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I love you, Sarah. I'm trying to handle a lot of pressure at work, and I messed up. But you have to believe me, Christine and I. It's not love. It just happened." Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. It just happened, as if betrayal was an accidental slip. Her tears returned in full force, but she refused to crumble in front of him. She took a shaky breath, determined to keep control. "I'm pregnant with our baby," she said, voice quivering. "I have no choice but to fight for us but you. You chose to destroy my trust. If we're going to get through this, you need to end it. Immediately." Richard nodded, though he looked more defeated than sorry. Sarah wanted to scream, to throw something, but she needed to remain as composed as possible. Her voice trembled with resolve. "You'll have to prove to me that this is over, Richard. Otherwise, I'm gone." In the wake of the explosive confrontation, Sarah found herself seeking solace in the company of loved ones. She confided in her older sister, Diana Robertson, a pragmatic attorney who lived only a few miles away. Diana wasted no time inviting Sarah over for a Sunday brunch, hoping to offer both emotional support and legal advice, if it came to that. Seated at Diana's dining table, Sarah took measured sips of orange juice while recounting the events leading up to her discovery in Richard's office. She spoke of perfume, late nights, and the image of Christine Monroe's flirtatious gaze. Diana listened carefully, her expression grim. "It sounds like you have enough to believe he's been unfaithful," Diana said at last, placing a comforting hand over Sarah's. "But the question is, do you still want to fight for this marriage?" Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. "I don't know. I keep thinking about the baby. Growing up with divorced parents isn't easy. But I also can't keep living with this weight on my heart." Diana nodded. "If you decide to separate, you should be prepared financially and emotionally. But if you choose to stay, he has to work for it. He must cut ties with that woman immediately." Later that same day, Harriet dropped by Sarah's house, bearing homemade lasagna and unwavering moral support. Harriet was incensed by Richard's behavior. "How dare he put you through this, especially when you're pregnant?" she fumed. Sarah shook her head, tears threatening once again. "I feel so torn, Harriet. One moment I want to pack my bags and leave the next. I remember that I still love him. And then there's this baby." With a determined look, Harriet squeezed her friend's hand. "You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." Meanwhile, Richard faced his own reckoning. His parents, Walter and Margaret Johnson, were old-fashioned in their views on marriage and family. They had always adored Sarah for her kindness and believed that once a man pledged his vows, he was to honor them. When Margaret learned of the situation through Diana's concerned phone call, she immediately summoned Richard to their cozy lakeside bungalow. Sitting in the living room, Richard tried to defend himself, but his mother's reproachful stare cut him short. Margaret spoke quietly. "Richard, how could you do this to Sarah?" "She's pregnant with your child. Have you forgotten your responsibilities?" Walter. A retired school principal removed his glasses and fixed his son with a stern gaze. "We thought we raised you better. Marriage isn't just about the good times, it's about commitment, especially during hardships." Richard sighed. "I know. I messed up and I regret it. But Sarah and I haven't been close for months. She's so consumed with the pregnancy and I felt alone." Margaret bristled. "That's no excuse. You have to fix this. If Christine's truly out of your life, you must prove it. Otherwise, you'll lose Sarah and our grandchild before they even have a chance to know you." His parents' disapproval hit Richard hard. That night, as he drove back to the house he shared with Sarah, he felt the full weight of the mess he had created. Regret gnawed at him, but so did a lingering question. Was his connection to Christine really something he could just bury? Behind the polished facade of Christine Monroe's ambition lay a tangled mix of emotions. Although she'd carefully curated her online persona, her personal life was far from picture perfect. She had grown up in a small town in Wisconsin, watching her father abandon her mother when she was only 10. Christine vowed to build a life of independence and success, so she would never have to rely on anyone who might walk away. When she moved to the city to work at Allen & Myers, she was determined to climb the corporate ladder. She networked relentlessly, volunteered for demanding projects, and never hesitated to do whatever it took to stand out. In Richard Johnson, she found a mentor who recognized her potential. Their professional rapport initially flourished late-night brainstorming sessions, conference calls with high-profile clients, celebratory drinks after sealing a deal. Over time, the line between mentorship and personal involvement blurred. Christine was drawn to Richard's confidence, his laughter, the way he could make her feel seen in a sea of colleagues. She knew he was married, but at first she told herself it was harmless, just a little flirtation. Gradually she sought him out more frequently, confiding in him about her dreams and insecurities. Richard, feeling the pressures at home and work, lapped up the attention. Soon, stolen glances became lingering touches, and the occasional after-work drink turned into an intimate rendezvous. Yet Christine was no wide-eyed innocent. She understood she was meddling in another woman's marriage, but rationalized it with her own heartbreak. "I'm not the reason their relationship is failing. It must have already been broken." Deep down, she realized she was repeating the cycle she'd witnessed as a child, someone bridging the gap left by a troubled marriage. But she believed she deserved a chance at happiness, even if it meant stepping over invisible lines. That Wednesday afternoon, when Sarah showed up unannounced at the office, Christine felt her world tilt dangerously. Richard's wife was younger and prettier than she'd expected, her eyes filled not just with anger, but also with raw pain. Christine had stood there, her heart pounding as Richard raced after his wife. She knew the fantasy bubble had burst. In the days that followed, Christine waited for Richard to reach out to offer comfort or reassurance. But he distanced himself, returning her calls, only to discuss urgent office matters. His manner was cold, efficient, and painfully detached. A part of Christine raged at the injustice. How dare he cut me off when he was an equal participant in this affair? Another part of her felt the sharp pangs of guilt. She imagined Sarah's tear-streaked face and the child growing inside her. One evening, Christine found herself alone in her upscale apartment, a glass of wine in hand. She scrolled through countless photos, rereading messages that once felt exciting. Now they stung with regret. She contemplated resigning from Allen and Myers, but her pride and ambition loomed. Why should she sacrifice her hard-earned position? Thus a storm brewed within Christine Monroe, a conflict between her desire for professional success, her lingering feelings for Richard, and her conscience nagging her about the pregnant woman she had wronged. Little did she know the next developments would force her to confront the consequences of her actions in ways she never anticipated. Richard Johnson found himself in a whirlpool of emotions. Each morning, he woke up beside Sarah, feeling the tension coil around them like an invisible rope tightening with every passing day. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and devotion, now bore a guarded gaze that reminded him of his betrayal. He tried to be attentive, waking early to brew her decaffeinated tea offering to drive her to doctor's appointments. But the unspoken accusation hung in the air. Work offered little respite. The once invigorating environment of Allen and Myers felt suffocating. Colleagues whispered about trouble in his personal life, and he couldn't escape Christine's presence. She still excelled at her job, commanding attention and respect from clients. When their paths crossed, an awkward silence replaced the friendly banter they once shared. He'd murmur a quick hello, avoid her eyes, and bury himself in spreadsheets or phone calls. Yet he was haunted by memories of her laughter and the closeness they'd shared. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, tried to intervene. James, who had known Richard since college, invited him out for a beer in hopes of getting him to open up. They ended up at O'Malley's pub, a dimly lit bar where the echo of clinking glasses and murmured conversations created a familiar backdrop. After a swig of beer, James leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "Rich, what's going on?" "You're a mess. Talk to me." Richard sighed heavily, rolling the cool bottle between his palms. "I messed up big time, James. Got involved with Christine, and Sarah caught us. She's pregnant, man." "What kind of person does that to his pregnant wife?" James shook his head, empathy and reprimand mingling in his expression. "I'm not here to judge you, but you gotta fix this. Sarah's a good woman, and you're about to be a father." Richard nodded, a wave of guilt washing over him. "I know. I love her. I felt like we weren't connecting and Christine was there offering some excitement. I never meant for it to go this far." "That's the problem," James replied softly. "You might not have meant it, but it happened. Now you have to choose which path you're going to take, and be ready to deal with the consequences." Consequences. The word settled heavily in Richard's chest. He thought about the baby, a tiny heartbeat that he had once eagerly anticipated hearing at every ultrasound. The idea of not being part of that child's everyday life terrified him. He imagined empty cribs and lonely nights in a half-furnished apartment if Sarah kicked him out. The vision stabbed at his heart. On the drive home, Richard pondered his options. On one side there was Sarah and their unborn child, a family that once represented hope and stability. On the other side there was Christine, dangerously appealing, yet complicated the living embodiment of a mistake he could not take back. Perhaps if he truly ended it with Christine, he could salvage his marriage. But a sneaking question remained. Would Sarah ever truly forgive him? Richard gripped the steering wheel, his mind whirling with regret and longing. He knew time was running out. Every day he delayed taking decisive action, he risked losing the life he once cherished. A month passed, steeped in tension and guarded conversations. Sarah's suspicions simmered, despite Richard's half-hearted attempts to show he was done with Christine. The situation came to a head when Harriet introduced a startling question. "Are you absolutely sure the baby is Richard's?" At first, Sarah was offended by the suggestion, but Harriet raised an uncomfortable point. Richard's unwavering suspicion that the baby's due date seemed off. Indeed, Richard had once casually mentioned that he couldn't recall Sarah's exact last menstrual period date. As if the stress of the affair wasn't enough, the spectre of doubt about paternity cast a new cloud over their already shaky relationship. Sarah felt both insulted and fearful. She'd never been unfaithful, but the seeds of uncertainty had been planted. Caught in a storm of worry, Sarah decided to take control of the narrative. She approached Richard with a proposition, a prenatal DNA test. "Let's settle this once and for all." She said, arms crossed, defensively. "I have nothing to hide, and if it'll give you peace of mind, then so be it." Richard hesitated. On the one hand, if he learned the baby was indeed his, it might force him to face his guilt with no room for denial. On the other hand, a tiny part of him fed by his own insecurities wondered if Sarah had grown closer to someone else during their marital distance. The tension between them and the consistent presence of Harriet or Diana in Sarah's life gave him irrational twinges of jealousy. Eventually, he agreed. They went together to a specialized prenatal clinic recommended by Diana. The process was straightforward, a simple blood draw from Sarah and a cheek swab from Richard. The results would take a week, and those 7 days felt like an eternity, suspended in doubt. During that week, Sarah struggled with waves of anxiety. She knew she had been faithful, yet the test symbolized more than just paternity. It represented their crumbling trust. Every time Richard left the house, she braced herself for another betrayal. Every time her phone buzzed, she half expected a message from Christine, flaunting her hold on Richard. On day 6, Sarah and Richard sat in tense silence in the living room, replaying the last few months in their minds. She was picking at the hem of her maternity blouse, while he stared blankly at the muted television. Suddenly, Richard's phone lit up a message from the clinic, stating their results were ready. Heart pounding, they agreed to go in person the next morning. Walking into the clinic, they were greeted by a nurse with a sympathetic smile, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. They were ushered into a small consultation room. A doctor wearing a crisp white coat entered with a folder. She cleared her throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the prenatal paternity test results are conclusive." She handed them a piece of paper. Richard scanned the words quickly, his eyes widening. He handed the paper to Sarah, who read it in equal shock. The test declared Richard was not the biological father. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah gaped at the words, rereading them, the breath knocked out of her. She felt as if the floor gave way beneath her feet. Richard stared, disbelieving. Every ounce of suspicion he'd harbored suddenly flared while Sarah felt a surge of protest in her heart. "This can't be right. This is impossible." Sarah left the clinic in a daze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Richard marched beside her, his face a mixture of triumph and pain, as though he'd been both vindicated and mortally wounded. The drive home was excruciating. Neither spoke the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. As soon as they stepped into the house, the accusations flew. "What the hell, Sarah?" Richard roared, slamming the front door shut. "You said you had nothing to hide." Sarah, reeling, fought to steady her voice. "I don't know how this happened. I swear I wasn't with anyone else." "Don't lie," he snapped, tears brimming in his own eyes. "The test is conclusive." "Sarah, conclusive." She gasped, feeling the walls of her world crumble. Was the test faulty? Could there have been a mix-up at the lab? She struggled to articulate her confusion, but Richard's rage was relentless. "I stood by you," he snarled. "I tried to fix this marriage, even after my mistake. And now I find out you betrayed me." Sarah trembled, pressing her hands over her ears as if to block the harrowing words. "Richard, please. I didn't cheat on you. I can't explain the result, but I'm innocent." Richard gave a hollow laugh. "Innocent? You're telling me the lab made a mistake?" "That's far-fetched, Sarah." Overwhelmed and desperate, Sarah grabbed her phone and called Diana. Barely able to articulate the horror of the situation, within minutes Diana arrived and tried to mediate. Richard showed her the test results, his hands shaking. "It's legally binding, Diana. The doctor said it's as accurate as it gets. So either my sister is lying or there was a lab error." Diana studied the document, her eyes narrow. "We need a second opinion. This result is too bizarre. Sarah swears she's been faithful." Richard snorted, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. "Sure, get another test," he said. "But I'm not sticking around to see how this soap opera ends." Sarah's heart shattered as she watched him pack. She wanted to beg him to stay, to trust her. But what words could she possibly offer now? She was as perplexed as he was. As Richard walked out the door, an icy realization settled over Sarah. Not only had her husband possibly ended their marriage, but her child's paternity was in question, and she had no logical explanation. She sank to the floor, Diana rushing to her side. Diana held her, stroking her hair. "We'll sort this out. We'll get an independent lab to verify. But for now you need to rest." That night, Sarah cried herself to sleep, unable to shake the sense of betrayal from both sides, her husband's affair with Christine and his refusal to believe in her fidelity. Meanwhile, Richard took refuge at James Peterson's place, wrestling with questions he never thought he'd face. Who was the father of Sarah's child, if not him? And could there be any truth to her pleas of innocence? A week later, Sarah arranged for a second DNA test through a reputable lab recommended by Harriet's cousin, a nurse practitioner. The results wouldn't be back for another 10 days, leaving her in agonizing suspense. Her emotions swung between despair and determination. Each kick from the baby felt like a reminder of the child she loved unconditionally, even if the entire world doubted her story. Richard, still living at James Peterson's apartment, found himself torn. He tried to immerse himself in work, but the tension with Christine in the office escalated. She cornered him in the break room one afternoon, eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "I heard rumors about a paternity test," she said, setting down her coffee mug, "and that you moved out." Richard exhaled heavily. "It's complicated, Christine." Christine studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Look, I'm not here to guilt you, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm willing." He gave her a tired look, recalling how her presence had once offered an escape. Now it just reminded him of everything unraveling in his life. "Thanks, but I'm fine," he said, turning to leave. During his solitude, Richard spent a lot of time reflecting on his marriage. Memories of Sarah's radiant smile at their wedding, the first time they heard the baby's heartbeat, and the countless moments of shared happiness haunted him. He'd betrayed her first, yet now he felt equally betrayed, his trust shattered by a lab result. Still, a small voice whispered, "What if she's telling the truth?" Unsure of what he wanted, Richard called Sarah one evening. She answered, her voice subdued but laced with longing. There was a moment of silence before he spoke. "How are you holding up?" She inhaled shakily. "It's hard. The house feels empty without you." His chest tightened. "Look, I'm still angry and confused, but I'm open to talking. Maybe we can meet for coffee." Sarah agreed, her heart cautiously hopeful. They decided on a small cafe, Le Petit Rose, the place where they'd had their first date. The next day they sat across from each other, the gentle hum of other patrons providing a comforting background. Sarah broke the ice. "I appreciate you meeting me. I know things look bad, but I promise I've been faithful. I'm just as baffled by the test result." Richard stared into his coffee. "I don't understand, Sarah. If the test says I'm not the father, how can it be wrong? But a part of me wants to believe you." She reached out and placed a trembling hand over his. "I'll do as many tests as it takes to prove it. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even after everything." His eyes glistened with emotion. "I'm sorry for what I did with Christine. But this baby, if it's not mine, how do we move forward?" Sarah's voice quavered with desperation. "I don't have the answers yet. But can we at least try to keep communication open until the second results come in?" With a heavy sigh, Richard nodded. "Yes. But let's be honest, if the second test confirms the same thing, I don't know if I can stay." Their attempts at reconciliation were fragile, built on the faint hope that science had made a mistake. Yet lurking behind their forced smiles was the ominous question: what if it wasn't a mistake at all? The day the second DNA test results were scheduled to arrive, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. She barely slept the night before, pacing her bedroom, replaying every intimate moment with Richard in her head. There was no one else, she was certain of it. But how to prove what seemed scientifically impossible? Diana accompanied her to the lab, the same official building with sterile white walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. A technician handed Sarah an envelope. She trembled as she opened it. Diana's grip on her shoulder tightened in solidarity. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The second test yielded the same verdict: Richard was not the father. The paper shook in her hands as she mutely handed it to Diana. The disbelief on Diana's face mirrored Sarah's own. "This doesn't make sense," Diana mumbled. "You've never been with anyone else, right?" "No, never." Sarah whispered, tears welling up. She felt trapped in a nightmare that defied reason. They returned to the car where Sarah broke down in sobs. Diana tried to console her. "We need to get a lawyer involved. Maybe they made a mistake, or the lab is confusing the samples." Sarah's tear-stained face contorted with anguish. "2 labs, 2 identical results. How is that even possible? Unless—" Her voice trailed off. "Unless what?" Diana pressed. Sarah's mind raced. Could she have had a rare medical phenomenon like chimerism, where her own DNA conflicted with the baby's? She'd once read an article about it. But that was exceedingly rare, almost unheard of. Still, she clung to that faint possibility like a lifeline. Diana, ever the pragmatic attorney, insisted on a meeting with a genetic counselor to explore any medical explanations. In the meantime, Sarah had to break the news to Richard. She dreaded the conversation, fearing it might be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. That evening, Sarah found Richard waiting for her on the front porch when she got home, having sensed the results would arrive. One glance at her tear-streaked face, and he knew. She handed him the envelope, and a fresh wave of anger mixed with heartbreak contorted his features. "I can't believe this," he muttered, scanning the paper. 2 tests, the same result. You lied to me, Sarah. All this time playing the victim when you're the one. He stopped himself, as though speaking further might break him completely. She grabbed his arm, her own tears flowing. Richard, I swear I didn't cheat on you. I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to find out. Please just give me time. He jerked away, eyes blazing. Time for what? To concoct another story I tried to reconcile. I tried to believe you. But facts are facts. She sank to her knees, sobbing in the twilight glow that bathed the porch. I'm telling the truth, she whispered desperately. For a moment Richard hesitated, torn between compassion and betrayal. Finally he let out a strangled sigh. I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't do this anymore. He walked away, leaving Sarah crouched on the wooden boards, her heart cracking open. The only consolation, the faint flutter of the baby in her womb. Little did either of them know the biggest twist was yet to come. The rain had started just before dawn. Light at first, then heavier, soaking the city in grey melancholy. Sarah sat by the window, cradling her swollen belly, staring out at the wet streets that reflected a world just as muddled as her thoughts. A week had passed since the second paternity test had crushed her, with the same unbearable result. Richard is not the father. But how could that be? She hadn't been with anyone else. Not emotionally, not physically. The accusation alone had been an earthquake. The confirmation a landslide. Each day she had carried the weight of disbelief like a second pregnancy inside her. Her appetite had all but vanished. Her smiles were hollow, offered only to reassure Harriet and Diana that she was okay. But she wasn't. She was barely holding herself together. It was Harriet who pushed her to keep asking questions. If you're certain, then the science is wrong. And science doesn't like to be wrong. Find the flaw. That simple statement lit something inside Sarah. A flicker of stubborn fire. She wasn't ready to give up on her truth. So on a foggy Wednesday morning, she booked an appointment with Dr. Patricia Langley, a respected genetic counselor with decades of experience. Harriet insisted on going with her. You're not walking into that room alone. Not after everything you've survived. At the medical complex, Sarah clutched her file of lab reports, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sterile hum of the clinic. The waiting room was unremarkable, beige chairs, motivational posters about family health, a faint scent of antiseptic. But to Sarah, it felt like a courtroom, a place where maybe the truth would finally be heard. When they were called in, Dr. Langley greeted them with calm eyes and a firm handshake. She was in her early 50s, with graying curls tucked into a bun and a demeanor that inspired both authority and compassion. Sarah launched into her story 2 paternity tests, both negative. A marriage on the brink. A man who had cheated, but who also believed she had too. And a child growing inside her, now clouded by a question mark that no mother should have to endure. Dr. Langley listened without interrupting. Then she leaned back, fingers steepled thoughtfully. And you're certain there's no possibility of another biological father? Sarah met her eyes. Absolutely. I swear on my life. Dr. Langley nodded slowly. Then we explore other explanations. Rare ones, but not impossible. She began explaining something Sarah had only seen in a scattered few medical articles, confined placental mosaicism. In rare cases, Dr. Langley said, turning a notepad toward them, the placenta, the tissue we use for many prenatal tests, contains a different set of DNA than the actual fetus. So a test done on maternal blood or placental DNA can misidentify paternity. It's not the norm, but it's been documented. Sarah's breath caught. You're saying the test could be wrong? Not because the lab made a mistake, but because my body gave them the wrong sample. Precisely, Dr. Langley replied. The test may have measured genetic material from the placenta instead of the baby. Harriet leaned forward. Can this be proven? With further testing, yes. But the most definitive answer would come after birth from a postnatal paternity test directly on the baby's blood. Sarah felt a jolt of hope so strong it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Finally, something that made sense. Something she could fight with. She clutched her belly, her baby kicking softly against her hand, as if he too understood that a truth long buried was beginning to surface. The rest of the appointment blurred into instructions: what labs to visit, what tests to order, which specialists to loop in. But the final words from Dr. Langley echoed loudest. You are not crazy, and you are not alone in this. The next morning, with medical documents in hand and her heart pounding harder than ever, Sarah drafted a long message to Richard. She attached Dr. Langley's explanation, the case studies, and even a voice note where she tried through a cracked voice to explain the scientific possibilities. Then she waited. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. No reply. By the third morning, Sarah's phone buzzed. A new message not from Richard but from James Peterson. I gave him everything you sent. He's reading it now. He wants to meet the doctor. Sarah could hardly breathe. Was this the beginning of a shift? 2 days later, Dr. Langley called her, her voice calm as ever. Sarah, Richard came in today. I explained everything again in person. He listened. Sarah's hands trembled. And what did he say? There was a long pause. He didn't say much, but he cried. That evening, Richard knocked on Sarah's door. She opened it with cautious restraint, wearing an oversized sweater and the same exhaustion she'd been carrying for weeks. He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure he deserved to. I'm sorry, he said. That was all. But the way his voice cracked, the way his shoulders sagged under guilt and regret, told her it wasn't just a formality. It was grief. Grief for the way he'd accused her, for not believing in her when she'd most needed it, for choosing doubt over love. I was wrong, he continued. So wrong. I let my own betrayal blind me to your truth. You told me again and again, and I walked away. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't move, didn't speak. I know I hurt you, he said, voice shaking. And I know this explanation doesn't erase that. But if you'll let me, I want to be here when the baby is born. I want to take the postnatal test, and if it confirms I'm the father, I want to earn my place again, as a dad. Maybe someday, as your husband. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to feel something other than sorrow. She didn't smile, but she nodded, slowly. I'll let you be there, she whispered. But Richard, this doesn't mean everything is fixed. We have a long way to go. I know, he said, but I'll walk every step of it. And as the rain continued to fall outside, they stood in the quiet space between the past and the possible future, not healed, not whole, but willing to try. Armed with Dr. Langley's findings, Sarah called Richard, leaving a voicemail and sending him a detailed email outlining the situation. She explained the medical anomaly and pleaded for him to speak to Dr. Langley himself. Days passed with no response. Undeterred, Sarah forwarded the information to James Peterson, hoping he could persuade Richard to at least consider the possibility. Finally, 2 weeks later, Richard showed up at Dr. Langley's office unannounced. His hair was disheveled dark circles under his eyes, betraying his own sleepless nights. The genetic counselor greeted him calmly, reiterating what she had explained to Sarah, that the paternity tests could have been compromised by rare placental genetic differences. She assured him that once the baby was born, a postnatal test would almost certainly confirm he was the biological father. Richard's world spun. Guilt washed over him like a cold tide. He thought of how he had humiliated Sarah, refused to believe her, and pushed her away at her most vulnerable. He realized the terrible irony he had betrayed Sarah. Yet he'd accused her of the ultimate betrayal, compounding her pain. That evening, Richard drove to the house they once shared. Sarah stood by the living room window, arms wrapped protectively around her baby bump. As he entered, she stared at him, uncertain whether to brace herself for more heartbreak or cling to hope. "I spoke to Dr. Langley," he said quietly. She explained everything. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "So you believe me now?" He nodded, anguished. "I'm so sorry for everything. The doubts, the accusations. I don't know. Angry. Confused. And all along I was the one who actually wronged you." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You broke my trust, Richard. You and Christine. And then you left when I needed you most." He moved closer, hesitantly, taking her hand. "I know. I don't expect this to be fixed overnight. But if there's any chance of rebuilding, of starting fresh for the sake of our baby, I'm begging for it." Sarah studied the desperation in his eyes. She thought of the endless nights she'd cried alone, the heartbreak she endured while pregnant. Could she forgive him? Could they rebuild their lives on the ashes of betrayal? "I need time," she whispered. "I need you to show me you've really changed." Richard nodded, tears in his own eyes. "I will. Whatever it takes." In the months that followed, Richard underwent individual therapy to confront the root causes of his affair. They also attended couples counseling, facing their problems head-on rather than burying them under resentment. Christine Monroe requested a transfer to another branch of Allen and Myers, seeking a fresh start. Her departure cleared some of the tension at Richard's workplace, though the guilt would linger for both of them. Finally, the baby arrived, a beautiful boy. They named Daniel. The moment Richard held his son for the first time, tears of joy and regret mingled on his face. A postnatal paternity test confirmed beyond any doubt that Daniel was indeed Richard's child. It was a bittersweet vindication for Sarah. They weren't magically healed. Rebuilding trust was a gradual, painstaking process. Late-night arguments still flared old wounds, still ached, but a mutual determination to move forward for the sake of Daniel guided them. Some days they felt the old spark of love that had once brought them together. Other days they wrestled with ghosts of betrayal. Yet in their child's innocent smile, they found a reason to keep trying. And so their life carried on, not as the immaculate suburban fairy tale Sarah once envisioned, but as a more complex tapestry, woven from heartbreak, hard truths, and hope. They learned that marriage is a fragile thing, held together by honesty, compassion, and a willingness to fight for it, even when the world seems set on tearing it apart. Thank you for witnessing this roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and unexpected redemption. Sarah's ordeal reminds us that even the strongest relationships can be tested by deception, doubt, and cruel twists of fate. Richard learned the hard way that straying from trust can unravel everything you hold dear. Meanwhile, Sarah discovered that love, though resilient, requires constant nurturing and unwavering honesty.